Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a matchup between two new chess programs which have recently hit the market. Now, the first one needs no introduction. Those of you guys who have played chess professionally are certainly aware of the program Stockfish, which is considered to be the greatest computer program currently available. Now, Stockfish recently released a new version, Stockfish 17, and at the same time, chess.com has released Discord bots, including Professor Dr. Wumpus, which has a rating of impossible. Now, I recently played against Professor Dr. Wumpus. I did a video a couple days ago, but today, let's see how the greatest current chess program will fare against this new Discord bot on chess.com. All right, so the first game, we have Stockfish playing with the white pieces, and the game starts out with the move e4. Now, Professor Dr. Wumpus plays move c5. We get knight f3, e6, and now we have the move d4. We get takes, and the move a6 here, and now bishop d3 is played. Now, this is what is known as the classic Con Sicilian. This is part of the open Sicilian complex, but black pushes the pawns to e6 and a6 while maintaining flexibility. Black can still play knight f6 here. Black can play b5, knight c6, or queen c7. All this flexibility in terms of possibilities and plans in this position gives black many options. So, after a6, we get to move bishop d3, and now Professor Dr. Wumpus plays move knight c6, and here we get the trade of the knights and this move bishop to f4. Now, when Stockfish plays bishop f4, the idea is to try to control this diagonal, and white wants to move the knight to d2 and c4 as quickly as possible. Now, in this position, we get the very surprising move e5 played by Professor Dr. Wumpus, and this is simply a mistake as it hangs a pawn. Now, since I did play against Professor Dr. Wumpus recently, you probably will know that I did quite well. I scored 2.5 points out of 3, and I think there might be a bug in the algorithm that causes it to sometimes make mistakes, and this is most likely one of those instances, because after e5, white can simply take the pawn here, and now black is not able to win any material. You might be thinking, well, queen a5 check. Hit the bishop, hit the king at the same time, create the classic right triangle, and win the game. However, this is a bishop, so it can retreat backwards, and white can go bishop to c3 here, blocking the check, and now the bishop is no longer hanging on e5, and white is simply up a pawn in the center of the board. So e5 is a little bit dubious from Professor Dr. Wumpus, but the game goes on. We get takes, queen to g5 is played here, attacking both the bishop on e5 and the pawn on g2. Stockfish plays the move bishop g3, and now we get this move bishop to e6 being played, and here f4 in the position. We get queen to a5 check, and Stockfish goes knight to d2. A nice move blocking the check towards the king, but most importantly, white keeps the center very close. If white were to play a move like knight c3, black could potentially play bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3, and if you were to block with a pawn here after black castles, suddenly there's a lot of pressure on this d file towards the bishop. Say you were to castle here, black can play queen b6, hitting the king and the rook, or hitting the king and the pawn, I should say. And if you block with the rook, there's bishop c5, simply winning this rook on the diagonal. You go king h1, queen takes b2. It's an utter disaster. Rook is hanging in the corner. If you move the knight to save the rook, then you lose the bishop and the game. So when Stockfish plays knight d2, it's a very nice compact move. Now, if black were to castle, for example, you'll notice the bishop and the pawn are guarding each other very nicely, and white can simply castle here. And after queen b6, king h1, queen takes b2, white can go for the move queen to e2, followed by rook to b1, and maybe a sack on a6 as well. Additionally, black is very far behind in development. You have a bishop, a knight, and a rook, which are on their original starting squares. So, Professor Dr. Wumpus plays move g6, trying to stop white from playing f5, and now we get the move f5 anyway. We get takes, and now we have bishop takes f5 being played. Here, Stockfish plays move castles, and you will notice that black's king is very open here. There are a lot of issues with the lack of development. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on their starting squares. Additionally, after takes is played here, if black were to try and castle out of the center of the board immediately, now white can play a very quiet move like knight to c4 or king to h1. And with the weakness on f7, the weakness on both of these diagonals towards the king here, and also on the light square diagonal as well, black is in all kinds of trouble, and the computer, as you can tell, says that white is winning. So, Professor Dr. Wumpus plays move bishop to e7, trying to finish development, maybe knight f6, maybe castle queenside or kingside potentially, but white is so far ahead that white is already winning. Stockfish goes knight c4, we get the move queen d5, and now we have queen to e2 being played, pinning the bishop on e7. Now, black would love to castle here, but you actually walk into checkmate after knight b6. Not only do you fork the king and the queen, but now his bishop is deadly as it covers both the squares on the diagonal, and the game ends rather abruptly. So, instead we get king to f8. Stockfish now plays king to h1, a quiet move to dodge any checks on this diagonal, this dark square diagonal towards the king on g1. Now black can't attack the king, and white just wants to go rook e1 and knight e5 and attack here on the e and the f file, and black still has no development. 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces are on their starting squares. We get rook to e8. Stockfish plays rook a to e1, and now we get to move rook to d8, and here we have bishop c7 being played. Bishop to f6 here. This is a move that probably doesn't do a whole lot, but if you put the rook on d7 or on c8, white is knight b6, forking the queen and the rook at the same time and ending the game. So here we got bishop f6 from Professor Dr. Wumpus, simply trying to prolong the fight, but the game is all but over. Stockfish takes on d8, and now we get to move queen to h5 here, trying to put even more pressure towards his pawn on f7 while keeping both of the towers on the two open files. So we got queen takes d3 from Professor Dr. Wumpus, and now Stockfish sacks the rook with rook takes knight, and here we get to move queen takes c4. Now, if black were to play knight takes rook, white can go queen to h6 check. King cannot run to the e file as the rook on e1 covers both squares. And after king to g8 and queen takes f6, white is simply threatening to go rook e8 checkmate. And after, say, queen d7, there are many ways for white to win here. The neatest one is to go knight b6 here, attacking the queen. Queen has no squares left to move to where it can guard the e8 square, and the game will end very soon. So, after rook takes f6, we get the move queen takes c4 being played by Professor Dr. Wumpus. And now Stockfish goes queen to e5. Now, this is a bit of showboating, I guess you could say. I don't know if this is the only way to win. Personally, if I were playing this position with the white pieces, I would probably go rook to d6 with the idea of rook to d8 check. And after, say, queen f4, maybe like rook d7, for example, knight h6, and something like queen to f3. Just get the queens off the board and use these two towers and win the game in short order. But this is obviously Stockfish 17, the greatest chess program currently commercially available. I think AlphaZero might be stronger, which is why I said commercially. But at any rate, it is going to play perfect chess, and it will find the best lines. So it goes for the move queen to e5, sacking the rook. We got the move a5 here, and now we have rook to f3. If black were to take, for example, after takes, and rook g8, to avoid hanging the rook, there's again rook d1 followed by rook to d8, and the game ends in a couple of moves. So Dr. Wumpus plays a5. Now we get to move rook to f3, and here we have the move queen g4 being played. At this point, it's all but lost. The rook is hanging. If you go f6 here, white can simply play, I think, queen e8, king g7, check, king h6, and there's probably a quick mate. I don't see the exact one, but probably queen f8, king h5, and queen g7 here with rook h3 coming, or queen takes rook. With the black king stuck on the edge of the board, the game will end in a couple of moves as well. So we get queen to g4, and now Stockfish plays rook to d1, trying to go for rook to d8 checkmate, as the king has no squares available. We get the move queen to h4, trying to stop rook to d8, and now Stockfish plays the move rook g3. Now, as I mentioned a few times, Stockfish will play perfect chess, so it will ignore free pieces, but white could have captured the rook as well. And frankly, at a beginner level, this is what I recommend, just to make sure you have a lot of material. Stockfish instead plays rook g3. We get the move f5, and now we have rook to d7 being played. We get queen takes rook, and here we get the move pawn takes queen. Professor Dr. Wumpus goes knight f6. We get queen f6, king g8, and after queen to f7, the game simply ends in a checkmate here for Stockfish, a resounding victory with the white pieces. Now, what exactly went wrong in this game for Professor Dr. Wumpus? What went wrong is that it played this move on move number 8, e5, hanging a pawn. Now, could this be an algorithm glitch? Could it just be the rating that it's at? Or move 7, I should say, hanging this pawn. I don't know whether it's a rating glitch, algorithm glitch, what it is, but it did make this mistake. And I think that's why it's very hard to give computer programs a rating, because in some cases, they'll make a mistake in the opening. Sometimes they'll make a mistake in the end game. Sometimes they'll play perfect chess like a Stockfish will. But when you start to tinker with the metrics and you try to make it so it's not playing perfect chess, there's always little things that slip through the cracks. And I think, frankly, this one pawn move, e5, hanging a pawn was too much. And Stockfish being 3,500 plus just pounced on it like the great computer program it is. All right. Stockfish wins the first game with the white pieces. So now let's take a look at the second game, where Professor Dr. Wumpus starts with the white pieces. And can it come back and beat Stockfish and tie the match? So the game starts with a move e4. Stockfish plays e5. We get knight to f3, knight c6, and now we get the move bishop b5. Now this, of course, is what is known as the classic Spanish opening, or the Ruy Lopez opening. It was invented by the famous Spanish, I believe it was a priest, Ruy Lopez de Segura, in around 1565. It's probably the most prominent chess opening. It's been around the longest, and it's the most popular. So here we get knight to f6 from Stockfish, going for the classic Ich bin ein Berliner opening. This, of course, is known as the Berlin defense. It was popularized by the former world champion Vladimir Kramnik during his match against Garry Kasparov back in 2001. I think it was 2001, or maybe it was 2000. Anyway, here we get the move castles. Stockfish plays knight takes pawn, and now we get the move d4. Here the game continues with knight d6, and now we get this move bishop takes knight. Worth pointing out that white could try to force a draw with pawn takes pawn, knight takes bishop, and a4. This is, of course, the classic line with a repetition, where the game ends immediately. There have been many grandmasters who have played this, but keep in mind, Professor Dr. Wumpus has lost the first game, and it's out for revenge. So we get the trade, and now we get d takes e5, knight to f5, and here we go into the classic Berlin endgame. Now, this was featured very prominently in that match I mentioned a few seconds ago between Kasparov and Kramnik. Kasparov was unable to tear down that wall, and it played a huge role in why he lost his world championship title. So we get knight c3. Stockfish goes king e8, we get h3, and now we have h5. And here Professor Dr. Wumpus plays bishop f4. Now we get this move bishop b4, and this is a move that's a little bit unusual. In this position, normally black will play bishop e6 or bishop e7. I myself have had this position many times from the black side with this king e8 h5 variation. I'm going to guess that there are probably at least 30 games in the online database where I've had this in blitz, classical, and rapid. So it's a position I'm very familiar with. Bishop b4 is, however, not a terrible move, even though it's not the main line. Now we get knight to e4. Stockfish plays bishop e6, and here we get to move knight fg5. Game continues with bishop d5, and now we get this move rook a d1. And here, Stockfish plays bishop c4, and now we get this move a4. Now, it's very clear from the programming of Professor Dr. Wumpus that at some point it is triggered to make a mistake. Now, what you will notice in this game, much like the first one, is that this position is not actually that much better for black. If white plays this move pawn to e6 here, trying to open up the diagonals, computer says after f6, after f6, knight to f7, rook g8, and now this very exciting move a3. White is doing completely fine. Now, why would you play a3? It's because currently your rook is trapped on f1. It cannot move to e1, where it will be captured by the bishop. And if you leave it on f1, it will simply get captured. So after a3, computer gives the line bishop to a5, b4, and now bishop b6, and rook fe1. And at this point, the evaluation is approximately equal. Now, you're probably also wondering, well, why not just take the rook on f1? White is sacking the rook, and you're doing well. But after bishop takes f1, if white takes, and you go bishop to b6 here, now white has rook to d7, creating the kebab on the 7th. But you also have this knight covering the d8 square, and the pawn guarding both the rook and the knight. And at this point, black is simply lost. One sample line, just to be really cool, is let's say black plays a move like a6. Here, I believe you can now play the move g4, and if black plays the move like knight to h4, you can go knight to d6, sacking a knight. There's king f8, e7 is simply checkmate with d's knights, and if black takes, now you take with a knight, and after king f8, you have either e7 or rook f7. Both moves lead to checkmate on the spot. So after g4, black should probably go knight to e7, but now white can play the move c4, trying to trap this bishop on the diagonal, and black should probably go c5, and after takes, bishop a5, bishop takes c7, takes. With these knights coming in very, very quickly here, the lack of coordination between these two rooks, white is just winning the game, and black is 0.00 counterplay. So, it would have been really exciting to see what happens after e6. I think the best line computer gives, as I said, is to play this move f6, knight f7, rook g8, a3, bishop e7, rook e1, not rook e1, sorry, bishop bishop a5 is what I said. And after b4, bishop b6, and rook to e1, h4, game goes on. I do think this might actually be some theory. This might be something that is known in the top levels of chess. But unfortunately, Professor Dr. Wumpus cannot keep up, and it plays this move a4. Now we got the move rook to c8, which is a nice little wrinkle. If black were to take on f1 here, this probably also is quite good. But Stockfish, for whatever reason, goes rook c8 first. I think there might also be something like bishop f1. Maybe there's some e6 trick. There might be some little wrinkle. I'm not sure why. But we get rook c8 instead. Now we have the move a5 being played, and here Stockfish takes the rook, and now Professor Dr. Wumpus captures with the king. Now, one thing I wonder about in these games is you're seeing that Professor Dr. Wumpus really likes to sack the rook, and I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the current chess world we live in, where there are a lot of memes about this exact topic. So here we got the move bishop takes pawn. Now we have e6 being played. It's too little too late, as Stockfish simply takes the pawn. If it were to go f6, knight f7, rook f8, and rook d7, once again, white is back in business, and it's very, very unclear. So we got pawn takes pawn. Now we have the move c3 being played, and here Stockfish goes king to e7, playing the Bon Cloud in honor of Grandmaster Hikaru. King guards the pawn, and now you try to bring one of the rooks to the center of the board. And at this point, with black having mostly completed the development, being up a rook for a knight in the endgame, black should win with perfect play. So we get knight c5, we have the move bishop b6, and now with this move, knight takes e6. Now you're probably thinking, why not go rook d7 check? Create the kebab, attack the king. But here, after king to e8, unfortunately, now all your pieces are hanging. If you move the knight, you lose the rook. If you take here with the knight, after takes, and b6, you're in the same predicament, where both the knight and the rook are hanging here. If you move the rook, you lose the knight. If you lose the knight, you lose the rook. GG immediately. So unfortunately, Professor Dr. Wumpus has to play knight c takes e6, and now we get the move rook c e8, and here we have the move bishop e5 being played. What Professor Dr. Wumpus is trying to do is trying to create counterplay here with a wooden shield and win one of these pawns on c7 or g7. Stockfish plays rook to h6, lifting the rook and intending to sack the rook for the two knights here. And if this happens, black simply has a bishop and a knight versus a bishop in this endgame and will win with the extra piece. So Professor Dr. Wumpus plays knight takes pawn, and now we get bishop takes knight, bishop takes, and here we have the move knight d6 being played. Now this is a great finesse from Stockfish because what it does is it pretty much ensures that white will have to trade off this bishop. If you were to go bishop a5, for example, after b6, bishop b4, c5, bishop a3, and knight c4, black will trade the knight for the bishop, and once the knight and the bishop come off the board, it is one less piece on the board, and with the two towers on open files in the middle here, black will win with no difficulty whatsoever. So Professor Dr. Wumpus takes knight, we get rook takes bishop, and now we have the move rook e1 being played. Here Stockfish goes king d7, and now we get the move knight e4, rook to d5, and this move c4 being played. Here rook e5 is the move. If black were to play rook d4, by the way, this would be a big mistake, because after knight c5, checking the king, if you move the king, you lose the rook, and you lose the game. And after king d8, knight b7, king d7, knight c5, king d8, white can at least force a draw with knight b7 or play knight to e6 here. And after takes rook c4, it's probably still a draw. But if anybody's trying to win after rook g6, it is white with these three pawns on the king side. Stockfish, of course, being the best computer program out there, does not blunder, literally, and it plays rook d e5. Here we get f3, and now Stockfish plays the move a5. Professor Dr. Wumpus goes rook to a1. Now we get rook to a8, king f2, and we have the move b5 being played. What Stockfish is doing is very elementary here. It's putting the rook behind this pass pawn, and black just wants to push these pawns up the board, create a pass pawn, and win the game. We get b3, we get takes, and now we have the move a4 being played. With white having the passive rook stopping the pawn, with black being able to put all the rooks behind the pawn, the game is hopeless. Wumpus goes rook a3, we get h4, g3, takes, and now we get the move king c7. Here, Wumpus plays h4, and Stockfish goes king b6, king f4, and now we get the move rook c5. Now, this, of course, is a fancy way of winning the game. It is not the only way to win, but as I mentioned, both Stockfish and Professor Dr. Wumpus, they're really in the mood to sack the rook and have some fun. Now, of course, as a human, I would simply go rook to a5 here, for example, or any move except rook c5. But here, this does actually make a lot of sense, because you're attacking the pawn on c4 here. If white doesn't take it, white could maybe go knight d2, but after king a5 and king b4 with a3, a2, black is winning. So we get the move knight takes rook. Stockfish takes, and now we get king g5, and here we have king takes c4 being played, h5, and we get the move c5. Now, the reason this is so completely over is that because when white goes king g6, now black can play the move rook to a7, and black guards the pawn from being captured, and now with the king and the two wide peepos on the a and the c files, this white rook will not be able to stop all the p. So we get f4, king b4, rook to a1, c4, f5. Now we get a3, h6 is played here. White could also go f6, by the way. At any rate, white is trying to create a pass pawn on either the f file or the h file here, because otherwise you just resign the game. So we get h6. Here, Stockfish trades. We get f6, and now we have a2, f7, and here we get this move, rook takes f7 being played. Now, this is, again, more fancy style. Stockfish is sacking the rook, because with the advanced pawns on the board here, white cannot stop the pawns, or he will have to sack the rook. We got rook takes a2. Now we have king b3, rook to a5, and here Stockfish plays rook f1. Now, I would have loved to have seen Stockfish go rook c7 here, putting the rook behind the pass pawn. Mind you, there are many ways to win, but it would have been very thematic in a rook and pawn endgame to go for this. Instead, we get rook f1, rook b5. Now we have the move king c2, takes, c3. And at this point, it's clearly a Lucena position. The king is cut off by a million miles here. Black is pushing the pawn up the board, and white's king is simply way too slow getting back. We get rook b7, rook b1. Here, rook b3, we get rook f7, and now we have king b2, rook f2, c2, rook g2, rook f3, king g5, and now we get the move rook f1, and white decides to sack the rook. Now, of course, what Professor Dr. Wumpus could have played is king g4, but after king to b1 is played here, now you cannot check on the back rank. If you go here, I just take the rook, and if you don't take the pawn, I'm going to queen the pawn and just win the game as well. So we got rook takes pawn, takes, and now the game will end in checkmate very soon. No need really to comment on these final moves here. Basically, you get eventually where black brings the king forward, or back, I should say, and after rook to h8, the game simply ends in checkmate here with this classic rook and king versus rook. So, Stockfish wins both of these games in a pretty clean fashion against Professor Dr. Wumpus. Now, what to say about the program? What I would say is that it's a very strong program. I think it probably plays at a 2800 plus level, but it seems like it has momentary lapses, much like a human would, where for one or two moves in the middle game or even in the opening, it falls asleep at the wheel, it makes a blunder, and unfortunately against really seasoned computer programs and top level humans as well. When you make one or two blunders that early, it's unfortunately too many mistakes, and you pay the ultimate price by losing the game of chess. Outside of these two moves, playing e5 on move 7 in the first game, and outside of playing a4, I believe it was on like move 12 or 13 in this one. I guess I'll scroll up to find it. Outside of those two mistakes, I would say that Professor Dr. Wumpus played some remarkably good chess. It was move number 15. If not for a4, a5, say Professor Dr. Wumpus played a3 here, it would have probably survived this game. It really didn't do a whole lot wrong, but unfortunately, one mistake is generally too much in chess, and that's why it lost. But overall, I think it's a pretty good training bot if you're a strong player, because outside of these momentary lapses, if you look at the game from start to finish, it is playing at a very high level. So it is definitely a program that you could learn from. So on that note, it was fun going through the games between Stockfish 17, which was recently released, and of course Professor Dr. Wumpus, a new bot on chess.com. I just thought it'd be interesting to see how the bots would fare against each other. It really isn't a surprise that Stockfish ends up winning, because Stockfish is the best computer program that is in existence at the moment. But I still thought it'd be interesting to show you guys these games from this match between Stockfish 17 and Professor Dr. Wumpus. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap of this computer bot matchup. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps, bot videos, everything else that we do here on YouTube. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. I'll see you very soon. See you guys. Bye.